Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, I know there are quite a few people waiting to sign in still, but we have lots to cover. We only have an hour to do it. And I think this topic will inspire a fair bit of interesting conversation. So I want to make sure we have plenty of time for that. My name is Eva Rocke. I work in our campus sustainability office alongside Natalie up here and Derek Panwisher somewhere else. Thanks so much for joining us for a conversation about the environmental impacts of AI. We have 3 speakers with a roadmap for today. We're going to take up about 30 minutes with content in the form of presentations, 3 speakers. I'm going to start. I'm going to try and lay some groundwork, some shared understanding around what it is about AI specifically that makes it energy and water intensive. Then we're going to move to Ben from Montana Environmental Information Center. Yeah, thank you. MEIC. And then Natalie Bond from the Mansfield Library. She's faculty on campus and has been part of the Future Project. I think a couple of the other folks in the room have also been part of the Future Project, where we've been engaging the topic of AI and how uses AI in our teaching, learning, and work. She's going to kind of connect some of those dots for us to what we do in the classroom, why this topic is important to discuss with students, etc. So there's a lot to know. Yeah, welcome. Thank you. So I think what I like to do when I know I kind of have too much to cover, and some of it's going to be kind of technical, and I don't want to lose a whole bunch of people in the first 5 to 7 minutes, is give you the spoilers up front for my portion of the presentation. This isn't all 30 minutes. The things that I want you to walk away with today, and I guess I'm going to add to this at the top, the disclosure, the point of this conversation and my talking points and those of the other presenters is not to send you away with this message that AI is evil, that we should all stop using it. You should not, there's no shaming happening here. I personally believe that something that is growing this fast is going to be ubiquitous before we know it. We should understand the implications of that. We should know what all of the components of it are, the consequences and ramifications, and we should make intentional decisions, especially when it comes to something as important as our energy systems. Regardless, AI uses a lot of energy, water, and materials. That is true of a lot of our technology. That's not necessarily specific to AI, but that footprint has grown real fast, real big with AI. The emissions footprint of artificial intelligence depends on the carbon intensity of whatever energy it's using. So if the data center is located, for instance, in Montana, where we burn more coal and natural gas than some other parts of the country, carbon intensity is going to be higher than perhaps a data center in Phoenix, where they have access to more solar. Okay, right? There's a direct correlation there. Energy and water use have gotten a lot of attention. I want to make sure we touch on the ramifications of extraction, manufacture, and disposal of the hardware. I feel like that doesn't get enough airtime. It's a pretty important part of the conversation. Some pretty, I think, important environmental justice implications there as well. And at least my take, I'm going to pause it. AI seems kind of unavoidable at this point. And its energy demands are significant, which means that tech companies, data centers, and the accompanying energy infrastructure stand to transform energy systems in our country and around the world. Okay, so that's where we're going. If you are like me, and I'm assuming in this room we have people on kind of the whole range of the spectrum, right? Like, if you're like me and you use ChatGPT maybe a couple times a week, you certainly haven't done a deep dive into all of its capacity, AI's capacity. You don't use it regularly in your teaching or research. I think we probably have some people like that in the room. And then we also probably have some people in the room who are much more familiar with AI and its capacity and its hardware and use it daily, intensively. I'm going to start with some of the basics, some things I had to wrap my head around in order to have this conversation. And so one of those things is that there are kind of 2 components of AI's existence, right? There's the training of models, and then there's the inference or the use of AI. So for both spheres of the work that's happening, data centers are a key part of that. And of course, both components have energy, emissions, water, and materials implications. So before you and I send a query to ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever, any AI tool, racks of servers hum along for months, the training of the model, consuming data, crunching numbers, performing computations. It's estimated that training OpenAI's ChatGPT-4 took around $100 million and consumed 50 gigawatt hours of energy, which is roughly enough to power the city of San Francisco for 3 days. So it's after this training, right, when you and I, as consumers or users of the technology, inference the AI models to get answers or generate outputs. And this is also when those companies have designed AI and are selling it to us, that is when they recoup some of their costs. So inference, the user portion, not so much the model training, represents an increasing majority of AI's energy demands and will continue to do so in the near future. And it's estimated right now that about 80 to 90% of computing power for AI is used for inference. So that portion of it that you and I have control over and that we're going to see exponentially increase probably as we use it more and more in our teaching and our work, et cetera. So all of this is happening in data centers. You can see there we have quite a few data centers already in the United States and quite a few planned. You might notice only 2 in the state of Montana. In a few moments here, Ben is going to get up and talk to us about a few more you probably have seen in the news recently. There's quite a bit more data center development planned for the state of Montana, an important thing to note and talk about more. There are right around 3,000 such buildings across the United States. They house servers and cooling systems and are run by cloud providers and tech giants like Amazon or Microsoft, but they are also used by AI startups. And a growing number of these data centers are set up for the inferencing portion of AI work, although it's not totally clear exactly how many. One thing that I've learned as I've done my own research over this last week to wrap my head around this challenge is we don't have a ton of transparency when it comes to exactly where AI data centers are getting their power, how companies are designing their models, or like how many parameters are used when models are designed. So it's really hard to nail down exact figures when it comes to energy use and emissions data. All right, so the takeaway from all that, data centers are the backbone of AI. They consume a lot of electricity. You've probably seen some pretty compelling infographics that are like one data query or one AI query equals this much water or this much electricity use, right? What I've learned is, for all the reasons I just named, this is really hard to nail down. And so rather than kind of drilling down into that per user data that I think you can find estimates of elsewhere, again, I wanted to zoom out and give you the big picture in the United States of what this impact is looking like. When it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, I shared already in my spoiler, carbon emissions, carbon intensity come from how we generate that electricity, right? So this varies considerably, state to state, region to region, depending on your utility, depending on the federal administration, what's supported, what's not. And electricity required for data centers is one issue. You might have seen the conversation really starting to revolve around nuclear and how some of these AI companies would really like to see nuclear technology move forward. That's certainly an important thing for us to talk about when it comes to regulation in our state and the environmental implications of that. But I guess I want to point out that use of electricity via a data center for AI or other technology is not inherently a bad thing. I think, including for us in Montana, using fossil fuel derived electricity is what generates the bulk of our climate impacts. So I think that's really the key question here. So in a state like ours, where we have coal strip, and honestly from conversations that I've been privy to, most of Northwestern Energy's intent to develop new energy projects is natural gas focused. The greenhouse gas emissions footprint is pretty significant. That doesn't include, right? So this is electricity generated and the carbon intensity of it. And that result, we use AI. There's also the embodied carbon side of AI. So in all of our electronic devices and all of our tables and chairs, et cetera, carbon has been There's a carbon footprint associated with manufacture, shipping, mining, extraction, all of that. Let's talk about water a little bit. Water is used in both the training of AI models and in the inference phase. It's lost during the cooling process, during training via evaporation. Just one little tidbit, ChatGPT 3 has been found to consume roughly 700,000 liters of clean fresh water during its training, equivalent to the annual water usage of about 5 American homes. And every AI request has a water cost, either indirect, used in electricity generation for the grid, or direct cooling in the data center. I would say this, from the research that I've done, this seems like one of the opportunities for efficiency that we haven't totally tapped into, but one of the greatest opportunities for efficiency. Some data centers use advanced liquid cooling and recirculating cooling systems, but evaporative losses are unavoidable, and companies rarely disclose that water per AI query metric, which again is challenging when it comes to really figuring out a precise footprint. Also, in doing this research, the degree to which data centers, not just used for AI, but in general, are using potable water is pretty concerning. Shifting gears again, yeah, drinkable, yeah, suitable for human consumption. Okay, so I did mention that I feel like this is the environmental footprint that is maybe least discussed when we're talking about our technology and implications of AI. Lots of rare earth and mineral extraction for sure when we build out all of this hardware. There's also the question of its lifespan. So from what I've read, 3 to 5 years is pretty reasonable for some of the hardware it takes to run AI. And we have a few people in the room who have really direct experience just handling University of Montana's electronics waste footprint. It's really considerable. I feel like this is something that's always missing from our conversations about technology, but a lot of this stuff is designed to be obsolete in a relatively short amount of time. That is true also of AI hardware. And the end result is that we generate a whole lot of e-waste. I think maybe kind of a unique situation in Montana is when it comes to the mining of some of the rare earth minerals that go into this hardware. We actually are relatively close to some of that happening. I don't know how many of you know that we have a cobalt mine for miles from Missoula in Idaho. So it's not that mining and resource extraction for these minerals is like totally out of the question for the Western United States. It's not at all. But a lot of it still does happen in the global South. It happens outside of the United States, where environmental regulation is less defined and less strict. So it's another question that we should be asking ourselves, right? Okay. On a more positive note, I want to make sure and provide a balanced view. I just ran through all of the sort of potentially negative ramifications from an environmental perspective of the growth of AI, but it has a role in some solutions as well. So scope 3 emissions, anytime you're examining scopes 1, 2, 3 emissions for a university, for instance, scope 3 is often the hardest to quantify. It's all of the things like your purchased goods, once you travel. It's very difficult to track. So AI can be used for carbon accounting platforms to automate some of that data collection, make it more accurate and accessible, and some transparency, which is always a good thing, but giving us a better sense of our total footprint. It can also be used for operational efficiency, building management, industrial processes, transportation, logistics, like optimizing energy routes, reducing traffic congestion, things like that, right? Those are all pretty significant potential benefits for the climate. I think I might be done. Okay, I'm going to stop right there because I think Ben's going to take it over from there. Continue this conversation about data centers and what that looks like in Montana and its connections to utility regulation.
Is that the beginning?
Yes, great. Hello. Okay, hey everybody. I'm Ben Catton with MEIC, which is Montana Environmental Information Center. I'm a policy associate with that group. If you don't know us, we're a member-based organization headquartered in Helena. We've been around for 50 years and work interfacing with government across all levels to serve this mission. So our right to a clean and healthful environment, protecting our clean water, clean air for future generations. Eva did an awesome job talking about the environmental implications of AI, so it gives me a little more room to talk more about just our regulatory structure and policy, and kind of what it looks like right now in Montana. So yes, data centers, MEIC has been zooming in on this issue really intensively over the last year as we've seen more and more announcements about data centers coming to Montana, and the scale of them has just gone 1,000-fold as far as what they're calling for and the impacts that they could have. So yeah, they're the energy and water hungry industrial buildings that are the physical footprint of AI. And as Eva said, I want to also be clear that AI does have some really cool and positive potential uses in the energy space. That one of the major solutions that we need to pursue and unlock a lot of our climate solutions will be trading electrons from one grid to another and making sure that we can transfer clean energy across long distances. And AI is like the tool that will do that in real time really well for us. So there are things that we absolutely want to unlock and use, but there's a lot of other things that we need to be clear about the costs as well. So in Montana, we've had data centers for quite a while, for decades now, but they've been a very different style. We've had traditional or retail data centers, and those would probably be calling for about a megawatt of power. So still a lot of power, but as you'll see here, a very different scale. Over the last decade, approximately, that scale has increased dramatically, largely due to crypto mining operations. Some of you might recall in Bonner, just outside of Missoula, we had a crypto mining operation that was, I want to say it was using about 20 megawatts of power. That was about a third of what Missoula County was using. So it was an enormous impact locally. And the county commissioners in Missoula County said, hey, if you're going to use that much energy, you need to be bringing your own clean energy to do that. And those folks made a choice to go elsewhere. The photo here you see is of Bighorn Data Hub, and that's in Hardin, Montana. And so that's another example of a crypto mining operation coming in, reviving a power plant, a coal-fired power plant that was on its last leg otherwise and would be closed at this point. So this is one of the ramifications of these huge demand for energy is that it's going to keep us from transitioning away from these really carbon-intensive resources. That picture there is of what Quantica infrastructure would like to have built out in Hardin, Montana, or sorry, in Rocke, Montana, about 30 miles north of Billings. And that is the largest proposed data center for Montana, and they are calling for 1,000 megawatts of energy in fully built out form. So we're going from 1 to 1,000 in just short period of time here, and that's just one of the proposals for Montana. So the scale is very different. So this is now a month and a half old, and it's changed a bit, but gives you still a really good kind of look at the sort of existential changes that will be happening to our energy grid. So the red box there with Montana, that represents 760 megawatts, which is our annual average load as existing Montana customers under Northwestern Energy's utility service. They serve the majority of Montana, and they are the ones that have been signing up, making letters of intent with data centers saying, yeah, we want to serve you these huge amounts of power. They've committed to 3 letters of intent so far that represent 1,400 megawatts of power. And so 760 to a new 1,400, that's an effective tripling of the amount of energy being served in Montana. And that's before any of these other projects that have been announced, among others. And so it's really dramatic. It's an incredible change to our energy system. They'll have major impacts on affordability. We're hearing a lot about folks in Virginia, where it's the global headquarters of data center development, but all kinds of other states where we're seeing really rapid rises in energy prices, but also to our sustainability, obviously, what we're talking about today, and to our reliability as well. We're seeing, a lot of threats to grid reliability, rolling blackouts, lots of things like that that would be existential threats in Montana as well in the winter, of course. As Eva did a great job explaining, location really matters. As you can see from these two maps, water intensity, consumption, and greenhouse gas emission intensity, Montana is not a great location for either of those. You can see some patches of green in eastern Montana. That's where our big wind farms are. So, if they were to locate and be served by some of those co-ops in eastern Montana, obviously it's a much lower greenhouse gas emission intensity in that scenario. But the reality is that a lot of this data center development is being announced in relation to some new developments at Colstrip, which is our coal-fired power plant. That's not actually a picture of Colstrip, but it looks much like that. And again, it's thousands of times more than what's required for our previous data centers that were storing financial data, streaming videos from those, or hosting websites, et cetera. So the kind of energy we use is really important. There's a whole other conversation we can have around nuclear, and affordability plays a large part in that as well. We've only built one new nuclear power plant in the US in the last several decades. Georgia, it's supposed to be $12 billion. It was like $36 billion. It was 10 years overdue. And so the kind of resources we have in the mix is really important. Montana has great profile for wind and for solar. Unfortunately, our public utility has not pursued those resources over the last decade. So focusing on the impacts to affordability on our energy grid, there are a lot of studies that have shown that ratepayers, residential ratepayers, are subsidizing big tech data center investments. In this Harvard study, they point to Duke Energy on the East Coast that was caught via litigation. They had to uncover some of these private shielded contracts that $300 million of the costs for a data center were going to be rate-based, so that and normal energy customers would be paying that on behalf of big tech. In Montana, under Northwestern Energy, we've already had substantial rate increases since 2022, and we're fearful, we're very, very concerned that we're going to be put on the hook for these investments. And so there's a kind of a handful of bills under there that went through in this last legislative session. Some of these failed, luckily, like HB 877 and HB 911. Those were both bills that would have further deregulated our relationship to data centers and how they'll be served with the Public Service Commission. Luckily, those didn't pass. But also, for example, HJ 46, which would have been a study of these sorts of impacts that would have been performed by the legislature, also didn't pass. So they refused to have a hard look at data centers. We did pass HB 424, which is a property tax bill relating to data centers, and further disadvantages us as Montanans in that we won't get a lot of the tax revenue that could be generated from these major investments, and huge amounts of money being spent to build these things, but they're getting one of the cheapest property tax rates, 0.9%, and that is extended by way of that bill to any of the assets that they would hopefully build, like power generation assets on site. Those will now get that same rate, and so we will not see a lot of that benefit. So why data centers are knocking? It's twofold. Obviously, we're finding that AI is running into it in every kind of corner of our digital worlds now, right? It's really unavoidable, and navigating the internet to not use AI, it seems it's sort of thrust upon us. So part of it is just a global boom of data centers as a result of that, and they're looking for energy anywhere. And Montana's been sort of a last choice over this last decade, but now it's anywhere that we can get energy, that we can build, we're looking. On top of that, there's the situation in which Northwestern Energy is being essentially handed some major shares of the Colstrip in January next month from some Washington state utilities that are exiting. It's a 40-year-old power plant. It is really, really expensive to operate, has high fuel costs, and because of their carbon emission laws in the state of Washington. They are exiting for those reasons. And so Northwestern Energy has been more than happy to take over these shares, and they're rolling out a red carpet for data centers. And they're very incentivized to do this for their shareholders, for their executives, but it's not a great deal for existing ratepayers. We don't need this generation asset. Our demand is not rising. Really, the main energy demand that's increasing right now is driven by data centers. So for us to be on the hook for these new shares, and then also for any other further investments that will be necessary to hook these things up to the grid, and the sort of the transmission that will be required to move these electrons around, it could be really substantial costs. We kind of talked about, this is something that I think big tech strategy is to make us feel guilt around our own personal use and kind of divide and conquer in that way. Like, well, I'm using it, so I shouldn't be that critical of it. And we see a lot of sort of graphics like this that give us a little sense of, our little interactions. But this is really a problem that we need to address collectively and from the top down, and that we need to regulate it. And so water is the other side of this, right? So energy, our reliability, our affordability, our sustainability, if we are, tying ourselves to one of the most polluting power plants in the whole US, it's top 5 greenhouse gas emitter. It's also one of the most polluting as far as toxics. It doesn't have a lot of the bag houses and controls that coal-fired power plants should have. Northwestern Energy has weaseled it out of making those investments for decades, and continues to. So keeping those things online, making the investments to continue to use that as our #1 power generation source is really problematic, really concerning. Water is also a really big regional concern. So this just shows the inside of a data center with all of the piping. So obviously the computers that are running at really high speeds are hot and they need water for cooling. They also need water for offsite generation. So this is a little bit maybe misleading in the sense that some of that water consumption would be offsite and related to power generation, but a lot of it is on-site as well. So to give an example from one of these calculators that you can find online. So Quantica, the one that is proposed for Broadview, Montana, if they want 500 megawatts of energy by 2027, as they have signed a letter of intent with Northwestern Energy to get, they're going to be looking at the water consumption footprint of 4 million gallons a day. If they were to get fully built out by 2030, as they'd like to 1,000 megawatts of energy, that's closer to 9 million gallons a day footprint. And they want to go to Broadview, Montana, because that's on that full strip transmission line. There's a power substation built already there. They have a bunch of land purchased up there, but there's no water there. So Broadview, Montana has been for decades trying to solve how to get their own water delivered by way of a 230-mile long pipeline. And that is costing the whole project for all these pipelines is, I think, $80 to $90 million. So you can allocate a couple tens of that millions to Broadview. And it's not even going to come close what that pipeline will deliver to what this project might need.
About like 8.8 or 9.9 million gallons per day of water consumption. Like, what would be a visualization of what that amount per day would look like a lake or something like that? Like, what are we talking here?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure what that. I mean, there's all these sort of like how many Olympic-sized swimming pools, etc. I don't have that off the top of my head, but it's a lot of water, a ton of water. So that is kind of the local and regional impacts. Okay, so just one thing that I kind of neglected to say is where are these things targeted right now? In Butte, we've got Atlas Power Group, which is an existing largely crypto mining data center, and they are a 75 megawatt footprint right now, energy footprint wise. They're asking for 75 more megawatts starting in January, so very soon, and they want all of that to be served by Northwestern Energy. Currently, they're buying that off of a wholesale market. Also in Butte is Sadie Data Centers, and they are looking to build a 250 megawatt data center there. And then we have, again, the Quantica one, which is a 500 to 1,000 megawatt data center. There have also been proposals like CAC and Great Falls. They've just pulled out, but the folks there that were having those conversations say that, well, there's 3 or 4 other folks in line that are probably going to come forward now. So there is a huge rush to build these projects out. In eastern Montana, there's a giant one called Upper Badlands. There are all kinds of, give you the whole list if you'd like. So what is our existing regulatory framework for data centers right now? Our Public Service Commission is our board of elected officials. They're supposed to regulate our monopoly utility to bring balance into our relationship with them as consumers. And we don't have any existing guardrails currently. We do not have a unique rate class for data centers. Oregon and Virginia have recently passed unique rate classes, so that segregate those costs that they're causing and leaves them responsible for them. We also don't have large load tariffs, which are a type of tariff that attaches to a customer with a really big energy profile. It can be something like long-term contracts because these investments have a long horizon. But we know that tech investments move at a very different pace, very different horizon. It can be transparency guarantees. It can be a lot of things with large load tariffs. Most of our neighboring states have those. Most of our neighboring utilities have those. We unfortunately do not. Northwestern Energy has been saying, oh, we're going to bring a large load tariff docket to the PSC. Haven't seen yet. Again, we have a really bad property tax structure as far as it's a great property tax structure if you're a big tech data center developer and you want a lot of incentives there. It's really bad if you are part of the public paying the public budget and also hoping that these big investments are going to mean maybe some money for schools or for your local fire department, et cetera. So kind of last thought to leave us with is that, yeah, we don't have a great regulatory structure. We need to be pushing our elected officials at all levels to claw our way back into the driver's seat with this. One of the main places that needs to happen is in the Public Service Commission. It also needs to happen in our state legislature, and it needs to happen in our local governments where we can have a little bit more say as far as maybe around the water issues, around other impacts that we're not even talking about that are also environmental impacts, like the local air pollution issues, noise pollution, light pollution, and other public health costs. So yeah, Montana can and must have the upper hand in these negotiations.
No, it's okay. I feel like embedded videos. That's okay. I was gonna play them anyway. No, it's okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm gonna try to go quickly through my part because we've got some really good discussion questions that I think everybody is probably gonna be interested and we'd really like to hear back from you. So like Eva said, I'm a faculty librarian at the Mansfield Library, and I'm here to kind of talk about how we connect all of this to the classroom. I recognize that maybe not all of you are instructors, but I think most people in this room probably are instructors in some way, are interfacing with students in some way. And that was just a lot of information. So I'm here to kind of talk about how do we connect all of that information that is rapidly changing with the students that we work with in our instruction and our pedagogy. So at the library, we do a lot of instruction around information literacy, which is a discipline that is really intended, particularly for college students, to arm them with the skills to be able to consume information, produce information responsibly, ethically, and critically. So we talk a lot about things like bias and privacy and algorithmic literacy, positionality, all sorts of anything related to information writ large. And one of the things that I talk a lot about in my instruction sessions and classes is knowing how a thing works or needing to know how a thing works in order to use it well. And so this is an example that I sometimes use when I'm talking about the library catalog and databases, because well, it's probably hard to see, but this image right here is sort of the front-facing catalog record, right? So if a student looks up a book, this is what they see. This is all the sort of front-facing information, right? Over here on the left is all the metadata that is behind that students generally don't see. And, you know, I'm not expecting students to understand metadata, but I think it's helpful for them to sort of start to understand that the library database and catalog is not just something that arose out of the ether, right? There's very real human labor behind it. And there's very real information structures that they are searching when they're doing those searches in the library catalog. And it's the same thing with AI. So over the past couple of years, I've slowly started to incorporate AI literacy into my information literacy instruction sessions, for credit classes that I teach. And one of the things so this is a little blurry. I'm not going to play this video, but this is a really excellent, the first 5 minutes of this video is from the MIT Sloan School of Management, and it really just breaks down how ChatGPT works. So again, I use the analogy a lot of sort of Wizard of Oz, like pulling the curtain aside, with different pieces of technology, and it's the same with AI, right? And so I'll often show this to students, just kind of an FYI, because it really does break down how these models are predictive models, right? We have a tendency to sort of anthropomorphize AI. We're using terms like reasoning and hallucination, and we're really sort of assigning these human qualities to a machine that does have human intervention, but at the heart of it, it's just a predictive model. So I found this to be a really useful, again, this is just kind of a 5-minute clip from this video. These guys that I know what a data center is another just like 1.5-minute clip of a data center. Again, could just be super helpful. I recognize that we all have a lot of content to teach, and so maybe not everybody has time to dedicate an entire class session to talking about AI. But if you can find a minute and a half to show this video, maybe talk a little bit about the data centers that are powering the AI tools that your students are using, that could be useful. Okay, I also wanted to talk a little bit about sort of institutional priorities. Because again, there's been so much dialogue around AI on the campus. We're starting to have more conversations around the environmental impact of sustainability. And I just wanted to really highlight how some of this is tying into institutional priorities. So these are the recently released institutional learning outcomes. They're still in draft form. But I just wanted to point out that information literacy and technology literacy are included in these institutional learning outcomes. And that's a commitment from the university to integrating that into our instruction and our pedagogy. So we've got sort of a structure beneath us as instructors to really start instilling these information and technology literacy skills and critical thinking too into our instruction. And this is totally discipline agnostic too. You can do this across all disciplines, whether it's an English lit class or a computer science class. And then also just the PFA for partnering with place. Again, it literally says we benefit greatly from our natural setting. So the institution, University of Montana, has codified a commitment to environmental sustainability and commitment to place in our priorities for action. So I think that that is something that we should lead with as instructors, and also make sure that we're holding the institution accountable. If we are stating that this is a priority, then we need to follow through with all the work around considering our own environmental impact, particularly as our AI use grows. Again, just kind of bringing AI and sustainability into the classroom. There's all sorts of literacies. This is kind of a nice sort of spreading out of critical AI literacy, which in my field is sort of a burgeoning topic, and sort of, you know, people are bandying about different definitions. But I just kind of wanted to highlight the critical piece. And so just thinking about you guys as instructors in different disciplines in your classrooms, critical thinking is really focusing on social justice dimensions, inequalities, things that are coming out of technologies, right? Ways that technology might exacerbate or reproduce or create inequities. And again, kind of what Eva was saying, AI, like, we're not here as librarians, we're talking about information literacy and technology to say that things are bad or good, right? We just want people to be critical, and sometimes critical is finding the good and the bad, and then you exist in this really interesting dialectical tension that can be a really cool fodder for conversation in your classroom, right? So, what are the ways that AI is harming the environment, but also what are the ways that it can help us figure out how to mitigate some of those harms, right? And then the literacy component down here, again, that's just helping students to know when to use AI, helping them to know where they might use it or not, why they might use it for a particular purpose. And also getting them to really critically think about the social, structural, and political dimensions of the technology. Students are super stressed. We know that students are really struggling with well-being and loneliness and stress around grades and careers. And so, I think a lot of the time, if we're not encouraging them to really think critically about a lot of this technology, they're just going to use it because it's going to get them to where they feel like they need to be, right? And so I think that's our role as instructors on a college campus, is to really try and figure out where to inject this critical literacy into our instruction, to kind of provide students with a support to start thinking and reflecting on some of these issues. This is just sort of it's a quote from a paper that I really appreciate from another librarian, but she talks a lot about creating and fostering sort of a collective community of inquiry. I think that's what we're doing here. I think that is what Google is doing with AI workshops, and I think what the Human Center for AI that has been proposed here at UM is also hopefully going to be part of. I'll just skip over this a little bit because I think we're kind of running out of time. But again, just kind of in your classroom, this is sort of an example of things that we do as information literacy instructors. So it's just a number of information resources around AI and environmental impacts. And they're all over the place, right? There's a New York Times article, there's an AP News article, a sustainability report from Meta. This is a tool from OpenAI's Academy talking about the environmental impact of AI. And so this is the kind of thing where in a classroom, I want to have conversations with students around looking at these resources and doing some lateral reading, finding out information about who wrote the sustainability report, who are the scientists that are cited in these articles, right? Maybe some background on the reporter that wrote this New York Times article. Just really taking that critical eye of who wrote the piece, what was their motivation, what are they getting out of it, where did they get their information, is it from a credible source? So there's a lot of ways you can approach this topic without really taking a stance on it, I think. This is just, I was trying to come up with some suggestions, again, that are sort of discipline agnostic. I do think this is a really nice moment at the beginning of the semester. Like, if you don't have time to talk about this in your class, if you are hopefully having an AI use statement in your syllabus and you're going over your syllabus on that first day of class, that could be a moment to have a conversation with your students around AI use, but also the sustainability and environmental impact aspect of it. Even better, if you can co-create an AI use policy with your students, they're going to be way more likely to adhere to that policy and use AI appropriately versus you just telling them what the policy is. And we are really seeing that kind of in the assessment sphere. This is also something that I've used in classes as well. It's a couple of years old, but it's this really interesting infographic. It's very detailed. I have this printed out on a large poster and I put it on a whiteboard in the classroom. And it's focusing on the Alexa tool from Amazon. But it's from the inception of like mining of rare earth minerals to the construction of Alexa, to the use of it, to the destruction or recycling or whatever going into it. And it delves into the human labor aspects, the environmental aspects. It talks about underwater cables impacting shark habitats. So it's just a really cool sort of active learning, interactive information resource to kind of assign students looking at different aspects of the life cycle of an AI technology. So that's something that I use in the classroom. A great effect. And then I wanted to end with this. I am not an economist. I'm probably going to butcher the definition of Jevons paradox. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. But this is also a really interesting discussion topic with students. And this was coined by an economist in the 19th century around coal burning factories and sort of technological advances in coal burning factories. And it's really this notion that if you have a piece of technology and then you make the technology more streamlined, right? It's easier to use, or you're using less resources to use. That doesn't mean that use of that technology is going to remain the same, right? It's a sort of paradoxical thing where the more efficient that a technology becomes, generally the cheaper it is to access and produce, and the higher the usage rate goes. So if you think about like horse-drawn buggies, right? We've got cars, and instead, it became quicker to get to a place, but because it became quicker to get to a place, use skyrocketed, and so now we're driving across the country rather than just to the next town. So again, this is kind of an interesting conversation starter with students to talk about, does this apply to AI? We're thinking about AI data centers, becoming more sustainable, having closed loop systems. Is that going to mitigate the problem, or are we just going to continue using AI more and more because it is going to be cheaper to access and use? Okay, that's all from me. I think we've got 14 minutes to focus. Discussion questions.
You have a lot to think about and discuss. At your tables, there are 2 small sheets of paper with 3 questions. I recognize we could easily fill the next 14 minutes just with open Q&A. And so I guess what I'm hoping is that by having conversation at your small tables around these 3 questions, let those out, and you have a chance to share ideas and responses and talk about how some of this information applies to your lives, your teaching or work. So why don't we take the next 4 minutes, small group, talk about it, share, let each other speak, and then we'll use the last 10 minutes of our time together to share out as a group. Sound good? Yeah.
Very briefly.